Open the meeting. So first item on the agenda is agenda changes, and there is actually one that we need to discuss.
Well, are you
Maybe
doing
the Hannaford
discussion?
yeah.
I don't know a better way of doing it, actually. I think we need it to be, when people are here to be able to vote. So if we stick it at the end, we're gonna lose Joe, and
Right.
so maybe leaving it where it is fine, and just Dennis and.
Are there
Hang out for half an hour.
I was just gonna recuse myself and go out of the room.
It may
I
not,
stayed here
Okay.
till 8:45 the last time.
I don't think it's gonna take that long, but, in any case, that's up to you. I
Okay.
was thinking maybe leave it.
No,
If you all wanna change it, Dennis, you might wanna chime in,
Yeah.
this is the time.
if you guys don't mind, and if members of the audience are going to stay for that discussion, you can nibble on Girl Scout cookies while. All right. Okay. So, no agenda change. Are any other agenda changes to be discussed? Okay. A second item is public comments for non-agenda items. Is anyone here to comment on anything other than? Okay. All right. So, we can go ahead and start with the discussion with Marty on the stormwater planning, the takeaways from the Water Matters events from several weeks ago. We are on a pretty tight schedule, so we're going to cut the discussion short at 8:05. So I think that should give us time to have a pretty good discussion. So if you want to go ahead, Marty.
Start in?
Sure.
So I did send material, first of all, I want to thank Alex for joining us on the Water Matters event, which was back in April. It made a very nice event with a nice focus on the Hinesburg Village. So this year we focused on the Hinesburg Village and for all manner of reasons, but it was just a good way to think about stormwater in a small town with a growing village, and stormwater becomes more and more important to think about more carefully and strategically, as we learned from Shelburne, where they are a few years ahead of Hinesburg and have a lot larger bills. So we had that sort of angle on it in terms of the expense, the cost of doing village build out, and the cost to folks who want to live in the village, and even the whole town. Like, what is the impact on costs when you build out and you don't think about the cheapest way to do it, or like the most cost-effective way to do it. So that was sort of the orientation of the discussion on April 12th when we had that event. And so we did the proceedings, and you all got a copy of it. It's only like 5 pages. I don't know if you've had a chance. Did anybody get a chance to read it? So it might be good to just take a really oversight discussion today, because people haven't really delved into the materials that much. But did anybody get a chance to look at this one pager, which is a summary of to-dos or recommendations? Did people get a chance to browse that in any way? Okay.
There are more copies over here if anybody
So-
wants one on the table.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your previous agenda items have been, RE Stormwater Planning and RE the Village, but we broke the recommendations, because that's what we're trying to get, is recommendations from the audience, and a lot of them were Hinesburgers and folks around, but it was a kind of a good, deep discussion, and it included, well, we got from you right off the bat, the priorities for Hinesburg is tighter regs, education outreach, and implementation. And this is RE, the Planning Commission, your previous discussions. So with that in mind, we're trying to come to you tonight and say, how can we help assist in anything that would make a nice partnership and cost effectiveness and that kind of thing? Because we're out there doing stormwater planning, we're doing water planning, we're doing very related research and data collection in this area. So we're just here tonight to say, we're here. And if you want to take some time to really get into the detail of this, maybe at another meeting, we'd be happy to come in and say, I can tell you tonight what we're up to right away. And then it might jog some things in your mind about how the planning commission wants to take it into plan update or reg update or, you know, whatever, education outreach, some of the things you listed as your priorities. But,
And Marty, I think everybody here knows who you are and what the "we" means when you say "we," but maybe for
Yeah.
the viewing audience, can you
Sure.
just tell us
Yeah.
them who you represent?
yeah, so I represent Lewis Creek Association, but with this Water Matters discussion, we did this with a lot of partners, including the town of Hinesburg and Responsible Growth Hinesburg, Lake Iroquois Association, who else was in there? Let me
I
just
think
look
those
here.
are the principal
Those are the
ones.
principal ones, we did.
Milo and McBroom was there,
Yes.
sort of as the hydrological experts that
That's
both
right.
the town and Lewis Creek Association
We all
have
tend to
used
go
over
to.
the years.
And they know this geography and this landscape and the land use very, very well. They've done the bulk of the, the reporting, so they're very, very familiar. Their computers are loaded with Hinesburg-related data, so they're a very neat go-to group, and we've become very familiar with them. They're actually doing the design work did the design work for the stormwater treatment at the garage through a grant that we got, and doing that with the town. And now we are in the middle of using Milo and McBroom to do the design for the floodplain restoration up at the garage. Now that, well, soon to be, the buildings will be out of the river corridor area. That'll be by this summer. And then we're gonna go in and get a final design, finally, and go apply for funding at the state to actually install the river corridor restoration project, which is a huge, huge high priority for both the state and the town of Hinesburg and us. And we're happy and delighted to be doing that with you. It's a very big price item. We just talked today about a preliminary cost of being over $350,000 to actually get this done right to the end. So it's a big commitment, and it's gonna be a huge benefit really to the village, which is downstream.
This is Beecher Brook, which
Beecher
is
Brook.
what Beecher Brook runs by the town highway garage, and the old highway garage that's being replaced has always been encroaching upon that sort of riparian area, and so with the new garage, everything's being pulled away from the stream, and then all this more sophisticated restoration work is being done.
Yeah, so those data were identified and collected back in '07.
Are
So
they,
it's taken 10 years, 15 years for it to actually get into this. We're going for implementation.
Marty, is this project actually bigger than Hinesburg? Can you tell us what other towns are involved in the same kind of work? Shelburne certainly is.
You mean in terms of river corridor repair?
All of the work that you're talking about in Hinesburg is being done in other towns
this is
as
true.
well, that your LCA
Yes.
is helping to coordinate. So
Yeah.
give us a bigger picture
So John's
than just
describing the
Hinesburg.
fact that we're a watershed group, and our board is made up of representatives from all the watershed towns.
Which are what towns?
Which are, and by the way, we sort of snagged the little Platte watershed too because of obvious reasons. We had time and capacity, so Shelburne, Charlotte, Hinesburg, Ferrisburg, Moncton, Starksboro. So going down to Bristol, basically, and up to Shelburne, and out to the lake and to the western greens. And so we know those waters very, very well. We do data collection on every one of those streams, and we do that with our South Chittenden River Watch group. We're learning more about the Lake Iroquois folks that are now coming down to Patrick Brook, which is a very key thing for village planning. And we're very sister relationship with the Addison County River Watch, where our Lewis Creek data is collected. So we go between Bristol and Shelburne, and we have a lot of depth of knowledge with regard to what the issues are, where we should be going to fix things up. You know, we've been very water oriented for the last 15 years.
Your consultant has worked in all of those watershed towns as well, helping
Well, not
them.
Milo and McBroom. When we get into the Addison County area, we rely upon Kristen Underwood from South Mountain Research and Consulting, does a lot of very high quality QA and guidance with the volunteer groups. These are really volunteer based groups. We put a lot of pro bono hours into the state could never monitor and get data at the level that we're, at the amount that we're getting it, because we rely upon volunteer trained labor. So all of the data is EPA QA approved. And it goes into a state and federal database, so it can really be used and referenced by anybody. So it's and you gotta hand it to the state, they've helped to create the system. We get our lab analysis done free through the state lab, which is really impressive. They've allowed that to happen, and because they know they get so much more back if you can bring that many more hours into the thing where they could never go. They can only monitor at the mouth of every watershed. That's what they do. And then they do the bugs and the fish at certain stations, like down at the wastewater and like that. But not to get too into that, I just wanted to give you that perspective on what our capacity is as a group. And we're very excited to be working a little more closely with the Lake Iroquois folks who are coming down from the actual Lake Iroquois itself into the Patrick Brook, which comes right out at the wastewater plant. And I think we'll be able to work after this meeting tonight, if I get any more detailed guidance, but might not happen tonight, and that's okay. But we want to coordinate more strategically, potentially, at our stations to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck.
Marty, I know this was talked about at the event, but how long has data been collected at Patrick Brook?
Well, we actually collected data in Patrick Brook, not at Lake Iroquois, but down, down here in the village area, and I don't know, in the last 10 years or so, but we have stopped collecting there, and focused on the main stem. So we have scant data, really. We have enough data for the state to say, you've got some issues there. And you saw the reports, and we can direct you back to those reports if you want, but there's definitely the situation where Hinesburg is trending toward impairment status of things like phosphorus and bugs and fish. When the bugs and fish are not looking that good, that's when you start to trend toward a stormwater impairment, for the most part. So, here we are, we're saying, let's look at this more closely and avoid getting into the expensive way to do business, which is repair. We don't want to get into the repair business, which is what Shelburne is doing, right? And you know that Shelburne now is stormwater impaired, whole town. They have to raise, just for the town of Shelburne, $4.3 million just to get going. Okay, and Route 7 goes through there, that's another $3 million. That's why that 7 million came up way in the beginning, where we lumped them and then they got broken out municipal to V-Trans. So it's not cheap. And our biggest fear is that the village will, if you have to go build some fancy infrastructure to accommodate this build out, you might have taxes that might prevent people from wanting to live in the village, like lower income people. So we want to, at least our feeling is that, and I think it says in your town plan, you want to have socio-economic diversity, blah, 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 everywhere. So, this is something that we feel we want to be mindful of when we're thinking about how to do land use planning. And Myona McBroom did that report, Alex knows all about that one, where they've already mapped the areas of high infiltration, this hydrologic soil groups, if you're familiar, the A, B, C, D. So that, you've got some A soils that are really nice for infiltration. What do you want to do with them? We could talk about that carefully and see if you want to put them on a list for conserving, potentially, to get the kind of infiltration that could potentially be useful in keeping water quality where you want it to be. We don't know the details of that. Getting into the weeds of that, there's definitely issues, but just generally speaking, that's how we're thinking about planning versus stormwater versus using your natural features as much as you possibly can where they're located in the village area to build out accordingly.
That was one of my takeaways from that workshop, was that the official map that we want to update as a part of the
Yeah.
village rezoning.
Yeah.
We've talked about placing, future stormwater treatment areas on the official map.
Yeah.
And one of the studies that Milo
Yeah.
McBroom did, and I think VHB added on to,
Yeah.
identified like 11 priority sites to maybe do projects. But what we didn't really do is what Marty just said, which is look at the best infiltrating soils and maybe identify those areas as potential receiving areas for stormwater treatment from surrounding development, because you can do better
So there's
treatment there.
opportunity there.
So I think as far as the work that you're already wanting to have done in this calendar year on the village rezoning, updating the official map with those stormwater locations is something that I know Joe has been urging us to do that, and that was one of my take homes from the workshop was, let's definitely do that, but let's also look at some of those infiltration soils maps and see if there are areas that we could identify. I mean, in my understanding of those maps, and I'm not a soil expert, so I'd have to look at them again, but is that the village doesn't have a lot of highly infiltratable
It's true, it's
soils.
limited.
But there are a few areas that might be
Especially in Patrick.
viable.
And I remember we did a, groundwater study. Eric Hansen showed us all down in Starksboro. This is a week before that April 12th event. He did a nice groundwater, educational lecture type thing. And and it was already the Lewis Creek watershed. And he showed, I think the town of Hinesburg had some nice recharge studies, groundwater and recharge studies done. I think Hinesburg was one of them.
We haven't had a recharge
You
study
haven't?
done
Well, maybe
since
you're
the
the ones that
early
did have it.
90s.
But in any event, I was very amazed at how many towns in that little watershed had these studies done. Charlotte had it done, and I know Moncton did, and Starksboro did. And I went, wow, these guys are like really curious about their soils and recharge areas and RE land use planning. And it doesn't take a lot to do it. In Charlotte, we just added those maps, which were completed, into our what we call areas of high public value. It's another one, recharge areas. So it's brand new as of just this past spring, and voting that it's an important thing to go and get site assessments and make sure that when you go do a permit, subdivision permit, or you go and have that recognized and evaluated so you can make an informed decision. But of course you have to enable that in your plan.
Well, Maggie or other folks, do you think it would make sense to walk down the document that Marty provided with the suggestions for action and just touch on each one and see if people have questions? Or some of them I know we've already done.
Yeah.
So I'd like to be able to say, checked that box.
Yeah,
We did that with the stormwater regulation revisions in 2015. Others we haven't done and we should maybe do as a part of the village rezoning. Others maybe are more long-term.
Why don't we do that? Just looking briefly at each one of them, and looking especially at the ones under town plan. I mean, realizing we just finished
Right.
our town plan and won't. So if there's anything urgent there, we might
But I
want
would
to move up on
encourage
it.
you not to, just because you've just passed a town plan, not to put it on your to-do list, because it's nice to not be rushed. And sometimes you can just put it on your calendar for 2021. But it's an important, recognize it as a high priority thing, just my 2 cents.
So can I make a request, so like as we go down this list, can you maybe give some examples of
Yeah.
like specific, so like I heard, make sure to preserve the A soils, because those are good for infiltration.
Yeah,
Just specifics like that might be
More
near-term things we
descriptive.
should think, that
Yeah.
we should think about that might put it
Right.
more, because I'm seeing a lot of terms and, I don't
Okay.
really know lid requirements and that
Can I
type of
just
thing.
say, right off the bat, that one of LCA's highest priorities, not counting data collection type stuff, but actual implementation, is the schools. So we're very, very busy with CVU. We're not busy with Hinesburg Community School because the town and others, the RPC, I think, got the concept design for that school. But that school needs to go to implementation. It's right on the plat. It's like a high priority thing to get done. So, and then we're busy with all the other CVU satellite schools. So we're very busy, especially since they went to the district versus the supervisory union. So now we talk with Gene Jensen and Kurt Prohl, RE, these repair, restoration projects that need to happen on every one of those campuses. And they are very focused on this because there is the 3-acre stormwater rule, which has not come out, but it is imminent. And it's gonna be a big price tag for all those schools. And you know what we're involved with now with the governor wanting to do, like, whatever, level funding or some craziness that does not recognize the situation that these campuses are gonna be just RE stormwater regulatory requirements.
The 3-acre provision that Marty's talking about is a rule that, or legislation that passed that says if you have an existing site, like for a business or a school or whatever, and it has 3 acres or more of impervious surface, and you don't have a state stormwater permit because maybe it's been there forever, you have to get one and you have to do stuff. And so
And-
properties like schools that have a lot of
Schools
impervious
are the big
surface
town
with large
facilities.
parking lots are gonna be in that place.
Yeah, and it hasn't passed yet, just to be clear. Hasn't passed quite yet, but it's imminent.
Well, it already passed, and what was talked about
Well,
this
we're
last
supposed-
year
the
was
law
that the
passed, but the rule
deadlines for making the regulations,
Yeah,
the
rule
agency
hasn't
sort of
passed.
let those go.
So
but-
here's the opportunity, LCA can help out and go get grants
Right,
to help defray the cost associated with these new budgets that are gonna be coming up in the next fiscal year probably.
So let's.
Sorry about that, that was a,
Yeah, why don't we look through the list and get to as many of these as we can.
do you wanna lead us, Maggie, or what?
Sure.
Okay.
So, what you've proposed for the village area regulations, adopt buffer and LID requirements.
that's what I think we did.
We're
That we
pretty good
have
at-
buffer requirements in the regs, we have since 2009, and we have specific LID requirements at circa 2015.
You're a model.
So it was,
Yeah.
Maybe we are,
I think you might be.
But I think we've done that, so
Yeah.
I don't know that more work is necessarily required on that one.
What's LID?
Low impact development, so it's just a way of thinking when you're planning a site to try to minimize the amount of impervious surface and also to try to get stormwater to infiltrate on the site and not just run off.
And our buffer's big enough?
That's an open question, but
Or
They're 50 feet right now.
well, ours are larger. It depends on the water body. So the canal, for example, is 50 feet, 25 on either side. Patrick Brook is 100 feet on either side, so 200 feet in total. The La Platte is even larger. I think it's 125 on each side. And then some of the others are 75 feet on either side. It varies. I don't know if those are large enough, but I think that we're still sort of working through those numbers as we see development. I don't know that we have a reason to change them at this point.
Okay.
You can look easily at the, those numbers, which is, we have those numbers too in July, and against the fluvial erosion hazard delineation, which is available for all of Hinesburg. And you can see where it compares, like RPC's done that for us. And the 100-foot line is pretty close to the, what they call the FEH or river corridor line, which is where the river needs to wiggle to not erode over time.
Yeah, when we look at those for development in the village, generally the buffers are large enough to encompass that fluvial erosion hazard area. So I think we're good for the most part.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think
Yeah,
we've done that.
They look pretty good.
So next up is require simple low-tech treatments on smaller development projects and private and public roadways.
So I think you can check this box with regard to development projects because, 2 reasons. One, in the village in 2015, when you did the stormwater regs, you said any project that doesn't trip the 10,000 square feet of new impervious and require a whole permit and all the rest of that, still has to make incremental improvements in stormwater based on, how much new impervious or land they're touching. And in this most recent housekeeping changes that it's in front of the select board next week, you also corrected a loophole in that 2015 regulations to say that projects that are below the 10,000 square foot limit, even outside of the village, still have to have a stormwater plan, even though it doesn't have to past state standards. So I think you've done it with regard to smaller development projects. Private and public roadways, I think there's more to be done on that. I know that at the town level for public roads, we have a deferred project to work on road standards that we need to get on. And there's discussion as a part of that to apply some better standards to private roads so that the runoff coming into the public roads is not overwhelming those public roads and making it tough for the municipality to treat stormwater. But I think there's more work to be done on that with regard to road standards.
Alex, that's really cool, but when you said you've already done the low-techy, the 10,000 square foot thing, what about looking at the soils, the hydro-soil groups, and say like you had a 5-acre parcel, and you had some A and some D soils, would you be are you authorized to call for development to try to stay out of the high infiltration soils?
Yeah,
you do that?
so the LID section of our stormwater
says that?
reg says that you have to show us where the best soils are for infiltration and explain to us how you're using them
Yeah.
for that purpose. And if you're not, why? And so I
And
think,
is that pretty well used by the DRB? Do they do it?
What are
well,
they using that soil normally for?
What soil?
if it's in a village, it's not
If it's
needed.
outside of the
If
village.
it's outside of the village, it's for on-site septic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a garden?
But it's
No, but
also,
on-site
it's
septic.
also good when on-site septic is in proximity to buildings to use a portion of it to make sure that your septic is cleaned properly and a portion to make sure that your, runoff coming off your driveway roof and everything else is also gonna be clean. But yes, you're right, a lot of it
But it's not
gets used for
one or
that.
the other necessarily.
Right, I think you can do
You can have
both.
both happening, infiltration and septic.
Yeah.
So, and leaching or whatever.
Right, just
Yeah.
not in the same exact spot. They
Yeah,
wanna keep the
you're not losing all
stormwater
of
away
that
from.
value. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so that next one is part of the LID. Use stormwater treatment to guide development.
Yeah, I think to some extent we cover that via that section. I sometimes wonder if the sort of platinum standard that I know you are thinking of is where we're really at in that regards, but yeah, I think in large part that LID section accomplishes that.
I think those last two bullets could be lumped.
Well, I think that last bullet is the one that we're not doing.
Oh, okay.
That's
Gotcha.
the one where we have not identified these areas of good infiltration
It's really a
and
question.
worked with landowners
Yeah.
to compensate them for that or
Right.
help them conserve it or,
Right, it needs study, especially in the village.
yeah, and there's not a lot of great infiltration in the village, so it might not be a difficult study if most of it is, hard clay and there's this one spot that's sort of decent.
Yeah,
Uh,
but that's already in a report.
We did let one of those spots go, in
Yeah.
a sense, when the Hinesburg Center Phase 1 project happened where Kinney Drugs is. That was identified as an area with a little bit better infiltration for some reason than the surroundings. Now, there is a stormwater treatment system associated with that development, which hopefully benefits from that, but there's a lot of impervious that got built on top of that stuff.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. What's your priority? Do you want to go through the town plan section or
Well,
the education?
I wanna bat that right back into your court. We're here to say we can help with certain projects and implementation. I think you know how to advance, town planning and regulatory, investigations that need to be there. We're working, as I said earlier, on implementation on the school campuses, which is the larger areas of imperv. Education, we're available to help with outreach. That's an obvious thing to get across to you. That's the third one. And the roads,
I think
you should
that, I
comment
think that the
yourself on
town
that.
administrator and the road foreman are all over the municipal general roads permit because it's a high profile item and the regional planning commission has been helping all the municipalities identify public road areas that have high erosion. I'm not directly involved in that effort, so I don't know exactly where it stands, but every time I ask it, the town administrator says, we're on it, we're
They're
doing.
very much
we're
on it,
doing
and
it.
it's a select board, it's a real select board thing versus a PC thing.
I think that where we fall down is on the education front. We just
Okay.
don't, I know my office doesn't do much in that way. And I know the commission in the past has said that that's, part of the three-legged stool is more,
Okay.
helping citizens
Is that in
understand
your
what the
job
right thing.
description?
No,
I think it should be in your job description.
okay. Well,
Peanut gallery,
what my comment was gonna be is that we rely on organizations, the watershed
Fine,
groups to
but
help us do that. But
work with watershed groups.
But we don't have a lot of coordination, so I don't know if we could do a better job of saying, hey, it's May, and every May, we're gonna do a little push, when
Like you do
people.
an annual work plan and say, here's what you wanna see happen, can you do it? But I mean, I feel like it's gotta be in your governance stuff versus just off the cuffy type, ideally.
Well, I don't know what the rest of the commissioners feel is a priority,
Yeah.
that was just what I was saying off the
Yeah.
cuff.
Is there, do you have, Alex, a tickler or just a place where you keep, ideas for the next town plan projects for the?
Yes,
Yeah.
for regulation changes and for town plan ideas, yes. But in terms of an annual work plan, like what Marty's talking about, we talk about it each year with regard to the budgeting that we do,
Right.
but, that's a little different, it's a little different, I think, so,
No, I was just thinking in terms of saving these,
these town plan
Yeah,
ideas?
these ideas
Yes,
for
I'm
the-
happy to put,
Okay.
these in that list, so
Right.
that when we get to, the town plan, we can talk about it
Right.
again.
I guess, the water quality stuff, I don't have a clue as to how much, you might want to partner with the water sampling activities that are going on, or just have meetings to know what's going on, and then you just wait for the results and take it, but have some kind of coordinated way of thinking about water quality, data collection in the village area especially, in terms of informing your build-out efforts, like density and location and all the things that would allow you to justify, doing build-out authorizing, based upon conditions of the area.
Yeah, I
I
know that
think
that
it's
was
an
part of the
important area.
conversation at the workshop, was that the sampling that the volunteers that you help manage, that sampling is important. I don't
Potentially.
claim to know
Yeah.
where exactly all the sampling is, or
No.
if somebody said, hey, Alex, I heard they're sampling and have been for many years, point me to the data, I wouldn't be able to do it, I
Right.
don't know where it lives.
And neither, I think, should you.
Well,
because
I'd
it's a
like to
lot.
know.
I mean, it'd be great for us to have a more systematic way of doing that field work and informing a staff person to take it to, a town planning pathway.
Well, so what I'm thinking is, when I want traffic count data,
Yes,
V-Trans typically is the agency that maintains that. They have a website, you can go on, click on a
yes.
count station, and it gives you the info. It's fairly straightforward. Does that exist for this water quality sampling data, or is that something that we could work to develop so that it's easy to
I
access?
think it's a question that we need to pose to, Mylon McBroom and maybe some of our consultants. But, every time you do a sampling plan, there's like an objective, and you make your design according to that objective, so it can be very narrow, or it can be broad. What we do is high flow trend monitoring. That's what
Right, I'm
we
just
do.
thinking about looking at the data, like, is there a publicly available, could there be a publicly available website where a planner can?
It's all available, but it's raw data,
Okay,
and you would not be able to put two and two together.
okay,
By
So-
just, just go in and say, oh, the phosphorus is high, like, we need to do this. So we do annual reports, and it's data interpreted and recommendations. So you could look at the annual reports, but as I was saying earlier, our sampling plan design is for us. We set it up so that we know the hot subsheds.
Well, I think
And
what's
so
important is
maybe
that
that's
we know.
useful to you too, I don't know.
I think what's important is knowing that the data is available and that
That's the
if
first
this,
step.
yeah, if, you know, this is,
Yeah,
you know, relevant or pertains to a specific topic we're discussing,
Yeah.
that we have access to
maybe
that
what we
data.
could do is come to you as a staffer just to go over the reports. Send your reports, and you can just read them and get a reaction, and we can just go from there.
Sure.
You know, cause one thing will lead to another. We might be able to adjust a design if the town of Hinesburg has certain questions to ask of this, of a design, you know, because right now we have our own questions that we are asking. So we set up the design like we're doing, but it may be that we wanna ask a different question,
Right,
you know what I
right,
mean?
or sample in a different location.
Yeah, and the
yeah.
part that totally has freaked me out over the years is that the state does their data collection on bugs and fish in our areas of where we live, but they don't have a method for reporting out. So we have to go and find it and go, holy cow, it just went from yellow to red. You know, and you're in trouble. It's like, we wanna know way, way, way back when it's in good shape and watch the trends so we're on top of it as municipalities. And I feel that's an easy role for us to play, and we will do that.
Yeah, that's great, and Marty, thank you so much for,
You're welcome.
being willing to
And
come
we'll
here.
just have to get back
here with
again.
us.
I have one quick
Yeah.
question. You said that the raw data is available?
Yeah.
Is it in a known format? In a structured, so like, I don't know, let's say you've got 8 values separated by hyphens. Do you know what each one of those values are? Like, That's my water flow, that's my-
Yeah, I'll send a,
and we could
Message.
get access to that if possible?
yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
I might have some magic ways to make that visible.
Jeff's the data guy.
Excellent, super. What's your name?
Jeff French.
Jeff French. Thank you, Jeff. Any other feedback as of now? Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, so, if there are no other questions or comments on that topic, then, let's move ahead to the Hannaford project discussion, the memo. We have a second draft of the memo. And you guys are gonna play a couple of hands of poker.
Get us when you're
Yep.
finished with this.
All right.
We can get back in.
Set your timer for a short
Coming to
amount of
get you at
time.
All right.
29:59, buddy.
Okay.
I'll open up the clerk's office and we can.
All right.
Okay, sorry.
minutes.
15, okay.
Now we're down to 15.
All right, it is reasonable. Okay. So, just a few minor revisions to what we looked at our previous meeting. And we had a brief discussion at our previous meeting, but we knew we didn't have a quorum. Are there any comments about?
I don't really have comments. I mean, I read this over. You know, it really echoes back to where this board was long ago, same points raised. I certainly don't have any problem with making those points again. I think they're all still valid. I would just caution the board that the planning commission sent basically the same memo years ago to the DRB. And the DRB did not, you know, take it into account at that time in the way we hoped they would. That may be the same this time, that may not be the same this time. However, the planning commission tried to raise these same issues with the Act 250 Commission in that same time period. We weren't successful in doing that. The reasons for that are really not changed.
What were the reasons for Act 250, if you don't mind?
Well, the reason was basically this, is that The official map that we were basing our concerns on allows for process to acquire land. And the Act 250 Commission, although they recognized that we had this particular parcel in our official map, pointed out that we had no financial arrangements, no acquisition fund or anything to really back up the official map. Now, the official map, that whole process was new at that time, right? Totally untested. I don't know if any other towns had really gone through it. So I don't know if that judgment would stand if we pushed it forward. But basically, it was you weren't serious about this because number one, you don't have the financing to do this, and number two, they were concerned about the generality of the uses that were placed on that parcel. Neither of those two things have changed. So I don't have any problem with this letter. I think this is in accordance with what was in the past. I think all these things are still true. I'm just cautioning the rest of the board, to kind of set expectations here, as to what is to follow.
So do we need to be more specific?
Well, we've been talking about that for years and we haven't gotten there yet. So,
I don't think Joe's point is that the letter needs to be more specific.
right.
I think his point is that the official map and the related documents that back it up
Right.
need to be more specific,
Right.
and now is not the time. You can't do that today.
As well as a commitment from the select board and, an actual mechanism within the town to show
Right.
we're serious.
But I will say, Joe, that this is not a letter for Act 250. This is a letter for the Development Review Board. And in the Development Review Board's prior decision, they discussed in quite some depth their rationale for
Yeah.
why they felt the project accommodated the official map. The DRB's reaction at that time was not the same as the District Commission for Act
True.
250. They didn't dismiss this out of hand because there wasn't a capital budget attached to
Right.
it. They said, we take your point and we think the official map is valid, and here's why we think the project actually does accommodate it.
Yeah.
So I think that, your concerns are still valid, but I think that the DRB then and now will take these concerns seriously. Whether they have the same reaction that the project actually does accommodate it is an open question.
Right. Also keep in mind that if the DRB did see things, as this letter lays out in the future, that sets a whole nother mechanism in process with a fairly short timeline. So, it's possible that we would win the day with the DRB, and just set ourselves up for a lot more work in the town.
You don't think that this letter, rather than saying outright, we deny you, but when I read this letter, I hear the location where it's at is unsuitable.
Well, I mean,
You know what I mean? Maybe they could
the PC
adjust.
doesn't have the right to approve or deny the Hannaford application. That's for the DRB. We can only send a letter to the DRB, stating our understanding and the way we approached, the official map and what we wanted to see about that, clarifying it.
We're providing
Yeah.
clarity
Yeah.
on what has turned out to be a pretty fuzzy area. So,
So like I said, I have no problem with this letter. This letter seems to me unchanged from where it was years ago. I think the same concerns are still valid. The only thing I wanted is, level set on is, what's the likelihood, what's the future?
I don't think we need to worry about that.
Okay.
We're just, but, note taken. Any other comments?
It looks good.
Yeah, I agree with
it's clear and concise and says what we want it to. And the last two meetings that I attended, I thought the farmer's market was already off the table. Just, am I remembering that correctly? Not the PC meetings, but the DRB meetings on this. It was pretty extensively discussed that it wasn't gonna happen. So we're just supporting that.
Yeah, I think that if I read this again, we were basically saying, you know, we can argue, but basically what was said before, that it's now with more specificity, which they didn't have before, as to where it was located, that the location wasn't that great, being in the back of the building, not very big, slopes, that type of thing. It didn't connect to anything in the town. And the other one was around the easement restriction about there must be a farmer's market operating, and if one doesn't operate, you lose all rights to using that community facility. I think we're just saying, you know, be aware of that, and maybe that needs to change where, you know, whatever it is a community facility, whether that's a park, a farmer's market, anything, for use for the town. So when I read this, it's not necessarily you need to deny them. It's just, it's in conflict with the official map. Get it in, you know, compliance. That's how I'm reading this, but that's me.
Any other comments? Are we ready to vote on whether to send this to the DRB?
Is this where I get to say so moved, or I make a motion?
Let's have a motion.
I move to recommend the memorandum as drafted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Was that
Opposed?
I'm opposed.
So just to update you on the review process, and then I'll go get Dennis and John. The last meeting was on June 5th. At that meeting, a schedule was discussed, and at that point, it seemed that it was continued to July 3rd for the DRB to review to continue at that time. Since that meeting, Hannaford has indicated that that maybe that's not such a good idea, as much as they argued that it was at the meeting. That so they've asked for a further continuance to the first meeting in August. So this memo will be received in plenty of time for the
Okay.
DRB to, you know, read it and then be able to discuss it in August. That's when the next meeting, next review will be.
It'll be August 2, the first Tuesday?
The first Tuesday.
August 2nd.
Alex, can I ask a question of why have they been able to present their proposal without a complete application?
Because their application was deemed complete.
But all of this is coming to light of information has not been provided.
Right, and that's their choice as to what information they provide. It's our job to tell them we need more, or if you want us to rule on what you've presented, we will, but it may not be, you know, the ruling may be not what you're looking for. But yeah, they presented information. We asked them, is this all you want to submit? They said yes. Then we had DRB discussion. Members of the public and the board expressed an interest in seeing more submittals. And so now they're working on more submittals.
Should we go
Yeah,
get
I'll go
Dennis
get
before
Dennis
he
and
runs
John.
away?
4 minutes early,
4 minutes early.
Yes.
I know. Yes. All right.
according to my. Hopefully he's still awake.
Welcome back.
4 minutes early.
We
I
were
guess.
afraid you would run away, so we stuck to it.
Thanks for your encouragement.
Yes, we need that. All right, so next up is the Village Area Design Standards, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, I don't know. There we are,
This is draft 2.
Draft 2.
You reviewed draft 1 at your last meeting and made a bunch of comments on suggested changes, and draft 2 shows you in the Microsoft Word track changes world, what changes I've made based on the conversation. So if it's underlined and in red, it's new language. If it's got a strikeout through it, it's deleted language. And I'm happy just to take your comments. The probably the most significant changes relate to James's suggestion about non-residential, about the formula. We had a lot of conversation about the formula,
Yeah.
like how much of this stuff do you need to provide? And James, one of your comments was it seems like the requirement was kind of high for a smaller non-residential building. And then James also said, but I think it ought to be summed. You know, if you have a mixed-use development, it shouldn't be just one or the other. It should be of a certain amount for that many people living there and a certain amount for non-residential, and add them together, and that's your total. So those changes were incorporated. Rolf had suggested a simpler formula for residential development based on the number of bedrooms, so that change was made. He didn't suggest this particular number. James didn't suggest these particular numbers, but these are the numbers I came up with based on running some analysis of projects and looking at what other communities have done. So those formula changes were somewhat substantial. And I added a section at the end that's not quite finished about off-site allowances or credits for, providing the opportunity for a project to create public open space off the project site, which I think Dennis had talked about. What if there's a great big open space that the town's trying to create on somebody else's land? Couldn't the adjacent property owner contribute to that if it doesn't make sense to do it on their own property?
So like 100 bedrooms, you get a half acre?
Uh, 100 bedrooms is,
At 200 square foot. each,
Yeah,
That's at
yeah,
20,000 square feet.
and it's a little,
Half acre.
That's a half acre.
bedrooms was a little tough for me, but I just went with
Yeah.
what Rolf said. I think of
That's
dwelling
why I
units.
think we should just decide where we want a nice big open public space and have one, because like, what are you gonna do on a half acre?
Well, I can show you some examples, but we have places in town that are half an acre where we can do things. I mean, half an acre is not a small area in the context of the village. A tenth of an acre is a pretty small
Yeah.
spot, but a half an acre is fairly sizable.
I ran some numbers, and maybe you've talked about this previously. 10 or more units, let's say you had 10 units, and let's say there were 2 bedrooms in all those units. So that's a total of 20 bedrooms, 200 square feet for each bedroom. That's 4,000 square feet, or roughly 60 by 65. That's not a very big space. If you assume 3 bedrooms, you get up to 6,000 square feet total, so that's 70 by 90, if it's all in one space. I'm reading that you can at least have no less than 2,000 square feet in any of these spaces. Does that mean you could have 3 2,000 square foot areas within your project to meet your 6,000 required amount?
No, let me clarify. There are two, one of the suggestions at the last meeting was to break this apart and to have one requirement for residential development and one for non-residential.
Right, I see
And
that in what you've outlined.
Residential is the 200 square feet per bedroom.
Right,
Non-residential is where you have the minimum of 2,000 square feet. So a residential development does not have a 2,000 square foot minimum. A non-residential development does.
Does that mean that if you have, say, 10 units, 3 bedrooms each, 30 bedrooms total, 6,000 square foot of space, that all has to be in one location? You can't provide a 3,000 square foot in one part of your project and another 3,000 square foot?
No, you could do that. You could split it up.
I mean,
Yes.
do we say you can split it up, or do we say you have to do it all at once?
I think what the reg says though is the space has to be useful.
Right, it
So
does
if you-
say
So if you
that.
split it up enough, right, then the question is, utility, usefulness. And of
Right.
course, we're throwing that to the DRB.
I thought the 2,000 square foot was saying that's the smallest you can do. But
Oh,
Alex
so
is,
John, I'm
correct.
sorry, maybe I wasn't looking at the right section. So are you looking at page 2?
I was, but starts on page 1, yeah.
Right, but the 2,000 square foot minimum size that you were referring to is on page 2.
Yes,
Okay, I was looking at a different section in the non-residential part, so that's why I was.
right.
So what that's saying is that, that yes, individual areas cannot be less than 2,000 square feet. That's the minimum. If you have a residential project with only 10 units and each of them has, let's say half of them have 1 bedroom and half of them have 2 bedroom, then your overall square footage for public open space is less than 2,000 square feet. And it's going to be one chunk, right? If it's more than 2,000 square feet, then you can have a 2,000 square foot chunk in one part of the development and a 500 square foot chunk in another, and
Where does it?
each
where does
individual
it-
open space though has to be, it can't be less than 2,000 square feet. So maybe there needs to be more language to address division and
Yeah, I
remainders.
think, yeah.
Is
I
that the
think-
confusing part?
Yeah.
If your total is 3,000 square feet, you want to know how should
Can
that
I-
be apportioned?
Can I break that apart or not?
Okay.
And if I can break it apart, are there limits to how small it can be?
John, are you also asking what the minimum is here? If you have just a couple bedrooms and you come out to less than 2,000 square feet, is less than 2,000 square feet okay? Or is the absolute minimum 2,000 square feet?
Well, this doesn't kick in, as I read it, until you've got 10 or more units.
Right, but as I was explaining, if that was 10 units, let's say it was an apartment building, a 10-unit apartment building, half of the units are 1 bedroom, half of the units are 2 bedroom. So you've got 5 2-bedroom, how many bedrooms is that then? 10 plus, you have 15 bedrooms
Total,
total.
right.
I guess John's right, though. I mean, if it's 10 dwellings and 200 square feet per bedroom, and so you're always gonna end up at 2,000 square feet or more.
So if you wanted to
If,
put a
if
10
they're all
unit in
single bedroom, right.
and you didn't have enough land to do the open space, you'd have to put less units in?
No, you'd have to do the offsite allowance.
Just
You'd have to find another place to do it, or you'd have to buy your way out of that requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's how it would work.
Buy your way out?
Yes, the last part of the regulations that says, offsite allowance and or credits talks about, in lieu of providing open space as required, the DRB as its sole discretion may allow the applicant to contribute to the town's land preservation fund. The applicant shall demonstrate the following, and then we need a formula to determine the amount of the contribution.
So,
I kind of question that too, because the Land Preservation Fund tends to be, at least so far, supporting land preservation projects, which have been farms, forests, outside the village area. Why can't we do something where you can contribute to improvements to a village-based public space? There was an example of that, I think, when the folks at Creekside too wanted to provide some money to outfit Lot 1 with some play equipment.
So we can
So-
structure it however you like. In South Burlington, they do describe contributions to a fund specific for spending on city center open space. We don't have a fund. So I think it's odd for a zoning regulation to refer, monetary contributions to a fund that doesn't exist. We do have a land preservation fund.
Right.
I don't think that fund is exclusively
No.
the domain of land preservation outside of the village. I think it can be used for conservation of any land. So I just thought it would be a surrogate until the town creates some sort of village-specific fund. But if you wanted to refer to that, then we would just make a recommendation to the select board when this regulation comes before them that when you adopt this regulation, you also need to create a new fund, or have the voters create that
But do
fund.
we already have to know what we want, what that money's gonna be spent on? Are we gonna have a plan on what we're doing with that money? Do we already wanna have a spot picked out and what we're gonna,
I think it would be important to have that planning happening, yeah, and I think the official map is the way to make that connection.
right, it says where you want it, but what we want there, what's it gonna cost? And
Right, well, I think the official map that we hope to update will have where we want it, what we want there,
There,
more
okay.
specificity about what we want there. The budgeting side of that we may not be able to
Fluctuates.
get to that point for the official map revisions. It'd be nice for the reasons that Joe mentioned, so that we have a more robust set of documents that talks about how we're gonna pay for it and all that.
So here's an idea. Make a fund that funds the official map funding per the Act 250 requirement. Just saying. I say it in jest, but, there's a funding mechanism.
I mean, I would, I understand where you're going.
Yeah.
But, the way the official map works is you don't spend anything if no one ever wants to develop a land that is on the official map and you're not ready to buy it yet. So funds can sit there for a long time and not really see community improvement. But if you're building, homes and stuff, I think you want infrastructure, to support those to be following up, if not at the same time, to be following up in a reasonable amount of time and not be, at the whim of, future development encroaching on the official map.
There weren't any regulations, to Dennis's point, there weren't any regulations that I was aware of for the Land Preservation Fund, which money was spent mostly on conserving farms, forests, places like that. There wasn't really a tight definition that said, this is where we want to do it. Could have been, we could have looked at places like high infiltration soils, for example, and said, that's where that money should go to protect that area. But we didn't do that, and the mechanism was whoever wanted to draw from that fund had to submit a request to the Conservation Fund, Conservation Commission, and they would decide whether or not it met their criteria, I guess, and then pass that approval on to the select board for the final approval.
But John, I think your point is well taken, that the Land Preservation Fund, although I'm saying it could be used for village-related purchases, it's not restricted to that. So it's possible that someone could pay into that fund and then a farm, down on the Baldwin Road could get that money and it would never end up being used for any sort of village open space.
Right,
So
and that's why
a dedicated fund would make more sense.
I agree
think
with
Even
that.
though we don't
I
have
think
one
so.
now.
even though we don't have that fund now, I think we have
We
to
oughta,
say,
yeah,
we
create
need to
it.
have that fund in order to direct the money to village open space.
When we forward these, I mean, if we end up passing this, we could forward the recommendation along with them to the select board to,
Yeah.
in means of a memo or something, and even lay out, any guidelines.
I had a couple things in reading this. One's a nit, and I think one is more substantive. The nit is in the first paragraph, public open space standards, you want to get rid of the and after green space. It's the end of a sentence. You know,
No, it actually.
Green space and
hardscape is the last word in the sentence.
did I miss it?
Yeah, it's at the end, it's,
Oh, I see, okay, sorry.
yeah, it
All right,
comes
well,
after.
I didn't really think too hard about the amounts. I know you've probably had discussions on that I've been absent for, sorry. I actually had two other things. So above ground utility infrastructure, I agree with what you're doing. Just make the wording so that we're not forcing people to put it on the periphery rather than like putting it further away from the green space. You don't always need to border your green space with, utility infrastructure. But the biggest thing I thought about was this, is that we really encourage, or we want to encourage, our language before is encourage master planning. And at the same time, we've talked about phasing. Okay, so someone comes in with a master plan and they have so many bedrooms and so much, commercial space, et cetera, and we're gonna calculate an open space requirement on them for that, and that's probably the right thing to do. How do we treat that in terms of, a multi-year build-out or something like that? What do we want the town to look like, or the village to look like, 1 year ahead, 5 years ahead, 10 years, 20 years? If there's phasing, right, do we want to make sure that there's public space built in at the same time as the phase? Or, is it okay for that developer to plan a bigger space that doesn't necessarily go with that phase, as long as they perhaps, put some money in escrow or do something like that, right, to ensure that it can happen in the future?
It came up, we didn't really flush it out.
Yeah, Dennis brought it up at the last meeting. I wrestled with that when I was trying to come up with a second draft. And I gotta be honest with you, part of me just got a little tired of this section and said, we're trying to specify every little corner and detail. We have lots of design standards. We can't spend 5 or 6 pages just on green space design standards. It can't that be a negotiation that gets worked out, in a public hearing setting? But what I was thinking more substantively, besides the whining part, was you want both, right? You want the ability for, I think Dennis's point was, we want large green spaces. Well, what if the first phase of a project doesn't include that big, large green space? So we want to allow that person to sort of get started and then put that in later perhaps, and not do a little mini green space to satisfy a requirement when the next phase is going to have a bigger
Exactly.
one.
I don't want to end up with 22,000 square foot,
Right.
Spaces when the overall master plan is, would call for much more than that. It would probably make more sense to make things more contiguous.
But at the same time, we want phase development to be able to stand on its own
Bingo.
in case future
Right.
phases never happen
Right.
because of Lake Champlain cleanup requirements or
Right.
the economy tanks or whatever. And so I went back and forth on that, and I kind of felt like, why not just have every phase have to meet the
I mean,
requirements?
that's why I was thinking about some piggy bank or something
Yeah,
like
some
that
kind of fund.
all right, if
I get
phase
you.
1 happens and in phase 2, doesn't happen for whatever reason, then we can get the green space, next to phase 1. We have, we already have the commitment to do that. Maybe we either even have a bigger commitment because there was an original approval for a multi-phase arrangement, but that we're not necessarily forcing, right?
I see. I would prefer it if the developer had to figure out a way to make the first phase include some portion of the overall master plan
Yeah.
green space and build at least that portion. And if it makes sense for them to build a larger chunk of that green space that extends into what they thought was going to be the second phase, well, then just do it as part of phase 1. because green space is cheap.
Then that's a different way to make the language, saying that if your project, if you have a master plan and your green space is based on the total master plan and it's a phased, right, and it's a phased structure, that when you build the first phase, right, you are required to put in, the green space, right, that is abutting or part of that phase one in anticipation of, future phases as well, right? So
Yeah, and I don't
In other
know
words,
that,
I
I
don't
don't know
want-
that the whole green space needs to be built out. What I thought was that I think it should be easy enough for a developer to say, your regs say I've gotta have this much green space for this phase. And for the board to say, great, we see your master plan, a portion of that green space is in your first phase, build it, and if you have to build a little more, great, if you don't, we'll wait for the next phase for you to finish that build out, rather than giving the developer the option of saying, my first phase includes none of the master plan green space, therefore I'm not building any of it, and I'll put money in the bank. Our track record with escrow and money set-asides and conditions for future is terrible. We do a terrible job with that, and it's not just our fault, it's the developers that we've worked with. Frankly, even the well-intentioned developers put a certain amount of money in the bank, and then 10 years go by, and the cost to make those improvements is 1.5 times what they put in the bank, and we can no longer, their money doesn't pay for the improvements anymore. And then if it's a condition on an approval, then we have to take them to court to enforce the condition. I just think we ought to get the whatever green space we want up, as a part of the
Well,
first.
I want to try and prevent us from this little chopped up stuff.
Chopped up, yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe there's a
I mean-
way to write that in along the lines of clarifying John's question about how big do these things have to be, and what do you do with the remainders of, things and.
It's still,
No, go ahead.
to my mind, it's still, this rule, the way we're thinking about it now, impacts what your master plan is. Because if you
Right.
need to build whatever portion your first phase requires, then you want to have that space up against the first phase.
Sure.
Which might not be the best place, if you look at the master plan, to have the bigger open space, the bigger developed public space. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in BlackRock's designs, without getting into details, there's a large green space sort of in the middle of all of that land. And yet we're saying we want to grow from where we're built already to, which is Creekside, the drugstore and so forth. We want to build up against that, but that's not where their master plan shows the big open space.
They would have to
It's
change it north
further
and
north.
south probably.
But because in that particular example, it is in the middle, it's very easy for them, and I think it is part of their phase one proposal that they're bringing forward. Mitch has been working with them most recently, not me. It's very easy for them to do that southern first phase with an extension just for the green space on the north side of it, so that there aren't additional houses being built into the second phase, but the green space connection exists. And that's what I'd like to see, is that they get innovative enough to say, yes, we have well master plan green space, and we'll build a portion of it as a part of the first phase, even if it's not really in the first
But
phase,
it's
but
gonna
it's
be
adjacent to it.
separated out from the first phase physically.
proposing is public green space?
Well, they haven't talked extensively about who would own it, but they've talked about it at sketch plan as a,
They might own it, but it'd still be open to
yeah,
the
it'd be
public.
available to the general public, is my understanding.
Yeah, and I was only referring to sort of the size of the space that they show in their master plan as being a significant amount of green space.
Right.
And that
I
landowner
wasn't-
didn't get credit for the ball fields?
No,
No, because that project
No,
happened ahead of
that's-
time and as a completely separate project to what Haystack's proposing. I think that it's tough not to talk about the specific projects. I think that
well, that's a good
the
example to
Blumstrand
use.
project is another good example. They want to do development in down around NRG as sort of a campus style with a lot of new non-residential space and maybe some senior housing. I think most of their sort of public open space as they envision it is on that wooded
Yeah,
hillside,
is further north.
further to the north.
Right.
That would be full of trails and the like. But what would prevent them if they did come into the DRB under these regs of doing their campus development and the board saying, well, you need to make your open space. Where do you want to do it? Your master plan says it's those trails. What's the problem with saying you got to do the
Do that.
trails as a part of the first
Exactly.
phase? Just because there aren't houses right next to it, like there will be in future phases, doesn't mean that it's still not valuable open space for the village as a whole.
Right.
I think that things should not hang out for 10 years, like
Mm-hmm.
you said a bit ago. That, to me, is absurd that we allow that.
Even if it results in a better master plan project in the end.
I think that things should be done in the beginning, like John was saying, or you were saying, I can't remember which one who said it. Because to wait that long that's not business practices. I mean, it's crazy, in my opinion.
That's the thing, you gotta set the expectation in the document about how it's
I
handled.
recognize I haven't been here for all of this discussion, but allowing the credits and the building off-site, to me, seems like a loophole that can be taken advantage of by those who are not quite, you know.
Unscrupulous people?
But doesn't it have to be overseen by the DRB?
That's what the way the language is drafted now,
So,
Barbara, is to try to make it at the sole discretion of the DRB.
Right.
But I think the flexibility is necessary
Yeah.
because without it, there's a good chance that somebody with a medium-sized parcel, we keep talking about these big parcels, right? There might be someone in the village who has a medium or smaller sized parcel that wants to do an infill project that triggers this, and they don't have the space to make a meaningful public open space, and to deny the project based on that, or to require them to dedicate the front lawn of a building for some pseudo open space, I think we might get challenged on that. Whereas if there's flexibility to allow you to contribute or do it somewhere else, it's harder for the takings issue to come up. It's harder for
So
that.
is there a way to, as you've just pointed out, if they begin their development, they have to do that, contribute to that,
Yeah, well, I think
right at
that's
the start of their project?
I think that's what this language is attempting to do. And also what it's saying on page 3 is that you've got to explain why the provision of the open space presents a hardship. And you've got to make sure that the project will have sufficient access to open space somewhere else. Like maybe you're right next door to a park, and so you're saying, I don't really need it on my parcel because I'm right next to it. But it also says for the larger parcels, only 50% of the minimum required is can you get out of, the other 50% you do have to provide because a parcel of that size should have room. I think it's these smaller parcels where I was thinking of an infill project where somebody, Kelly's Field might be an example where there are 24 units there now. They have room at the back of the project to do another building. And in fact, before the previous owner sold it to the current owner,
Yeah, there was talk.
they came in with a sketch plan application for a
Right.
single building with another 20 units in it or something like that. And I think they did that just to increase the sales value, the potential. But in any case, if they'd done that, I don't think they would have had room on that parcel to satisfy this requirement. But they're right next to the Russell, Donegan property. They benefit from those public trails. Maybe they could have made a contribution to this special fund or helped build it somewhere else.
So is that how Thistle Hill got around green space? I can't think of any green space in that
It's all the
development.
woods behind.
They have the
Thistle
woods, they
Hill
have
has-
trails.
Yeah, Thistle Hill
They have a lot of
has
land.
private green space. I'm trying to remember how many acres. It may be 6 to 7 acres
And it
of
belongs to the development?
yes,
Yeah.
the homeowners association, it's available to them, and then the public portion are just the trails, but all around those trails through the woods, that's all land that can't be developed, that's available for the people who live in the development to go run around and have fun on.
So that's private land that's public.
That's
Trails.
private
Trails.
land within which a small trail slice is
There's an
public.
easement that town has for those trails
The public doesn't have the right to go, you know,
into the woods.
into the woods
Oh,
and
Go
okay.
and
build tree houses and, you know,
Right.
play
Cut
tag
trees
and
out or-
have a capture the flag tournament in the middle of the woods or anything like that.
So I like all this, what we're talking about, and I do, but I also am interested to hear more about Dennis's idea of picking out where we should have it, and maybe there's a way to blend that into this somehow. And I don't know if he used the official map, or, because I kind of understand what you're trying to say, like, this is what we want, and then let them build around it, but I just want to hear more of Dennis's idea to kind of flush it out a little
I
bit.
just think we want this nice park.
Yeah.
We don't want one here and one here in the village. I would think you would want it in one big area and work with a developer or do something to try, you know, he donates that land and then these other developers donate money toward it. I mean, we've never even done anything with this lot one. Right? I mean, we want a park, but we've never, how come we're not funding that right now? You know what I mean?
And it's valid, so how do we need to think about that and somehow, I don't know, I think we
And I don't
talked a
think
little bit
I
like
don't think
things
the
gotta be
developers, all the
contiguous and
developers
stuff.
have to be, pay the whole blunt of it either. I mean,
No,
we're all gonna benefit from it too, so I mean,
but I think, to your point, the reason Lot 1 nothing's been done with it is, I don't think there's really a mechanism or like, who owns it? Who gets to say what's done on it?
Well,
Who,
the town owns it,
okay,
and they were
There's just
offered
no fund.
money.
but who's
For
gonna
it.
fund it? Yeah,
Right.
who's
They
gonna
were
say?
offered money by the
well, we had a
developer.
chance to have it partially funded. I'm not sure why they didn't take
The
it.
select board said no.
I don't know.
They weren't.
Okay,
But that was, that one is a little different, because that one, the developer of Creekside 2 was trying to get something more for his project, rather than it being a requirement that he put the money into a fund that could improve Lot 1. It was, and I think
I
the
know, but
select
it's usually
board.
one hand washes the other. That's usually
Yeah,
how it
I know, but I
works.
think the select board was saying, no, we don't wanna give you what you want just because you've given us money to build a tot lot on Lot 1.
Right.
I'm guessing, I guess.
The
but-
select board also never fully bought into the plan for that space.
Wow.
So when the fire department police station proposal was made and there was a plan developed for that lot, for the green space portion, it looked pretty, it had a very big budget, and some people liked it, but I'm not sure the select board ever felt like it was a
I
done
mean,
deal.
are they
And-
worried that they're gonna need it to expand the firehouse?
No, I think
No.
some of them want there to be another sort of more robust community involvement process to decide what happens in that space.
That
And
was a
bef-
different select board
That's
than
true.
we have now.
That's true. Well, I think one of the members who has that concern is still on the
It's
select
still on the
but-
board, but the majority
Yeah,
of the 5 members,
Is that the property behind the police station there?
Yeah.
Over there, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful space.
behind
is.
the
I
old
agree.
police station, now
Should stay the way
another
it is.
business. And
Pretty.
Yeah.
Especially if you're at the PT place and you're on an exercise machine, you look right out at it. It's lovely. It's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I'd
we
hate
talked
to
about-
see a lot done there, I
Yes.
think. It's pretty.
Well,
Yeah,
people
well,
use it in the winter.
the plan
and-
that was included in that public safety building project had a small area for a tot lot, but otherwise it was landscaping and some sidewalks. It was still gonna be mostly an open space.
primarily open, yeah.
The
But-
big tree that's there now, which everybody tells me is not in good shape at all,
Right.
and we need to get our town tree warden to look at that and say, is this something we can save? If
Fix.
so, how much? And if not, what do we do?
Right.
I think any of us look at that tree and you could say, that tree's not real healthy.
I would
So-
encourage you to think about the Bristol Green versus
Mm-hmm.
that space. And while I appreciate the fact that you two like that space the way it is now, it is just a mowed grass lawn.
Right,
yeah,
Whereas if you look at the
right.
Bristol Green where it has pathways through it and some
Right.
tree
Lots
plantings,
of
It's
trees,
shaded
there's a
and-
lot of,
I
there's
think
a lot
that
of
place
shade.
could be,
gazebo.
They have a
Yeah.
gazebo.
it's a
they've
much,
got
it's a
they've got
much larger
playground.
space than what
They got
this
a
is,
really,
but.
nice.
they got a
But
really
that's
cool
been
place.
in
just-
existence for as ever.
Yeah.
Right, I'm just saying that,
It's just
the
different.
space that you appreciate, I think could be so much more.
It
And,
could.
and,
I
and
agree.
still be attractive.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree, yeah.
I always felt they were mowing it as a temporary thing, waiting for the next step. And
I just would like to, like John said, for what up to me, to see it fairly open, but with some other creative things that I'm sure a landscape architect or somebody could come up with.
And I also wanted to say that I think, and I agree with you, Dennis, it's, we look at lot one that has no landscaping, no paths to cross, no benches, no way to really enjoy it unless you're like running around with a soccer ball. But I think there is also value in smaller green spaces. I picture, I guess I'm picturing the village, but, somebody walking on a hot day, and coming across a smaller but still nice shady, space with a park bench and whatnot. I think there's value in that, and a variety of spaces. So anyway, I
Personally, the
Isn't
space,
it possible to use the official map as a way to identify some of the kind of spaces, large spaces and small spaces, the kind of thing that Dennis is talking about? I mean, can't we sprinkle spaces around on our official map and say, this is where we want something to happen?
well, we're
Where
going to
there's
be
a current
we're going to be
opportunity.
talking about the official map.
Well, we already
but what do
have.
we- yeah.
You sort of, I think the next step is for me to generate a revision that you can actually then review and talk about with the Trails Committee and here. But I'm in John's camp. I think that is the way to do it, is make the official map way more specific and create the blobs you want in the proximate locations you want them, and have a pointer to each one saying, this is gonna be a playground. This is gonna be a contemplative park. This is gonna be, whatever, and then just have a plan for
I
it.
agree with, I definitely agree with that. I'm a real proponent of the official map. The little voice in the back of my mind though is flexibility. If a developer comes in with a master plan with some great ideas, right, and they don't necessarily correspond, 100% to the official map, right?
Right.
We want to be open to that.
DRB make that call?
Well, there is a provision that'll, you can revise the official
Yeah.
map, and that, I think that if a developer came in, before they
Yeah.
made their application and said, here's what we're thinking, isn't this great? The DRB initial sketch plan review process could also begin with a meeting with the planning commission where the developer says, this is what I'm proposing to the DRB, but I'd also like to have you guys revise the official map because isn't my idea grand?
I agree, there absolutely has to be flexibility, because what if we decide, let's have a green blob here, and the developer comes in with a great plan, but there just happens to be, a row of dumpsters right next to, we need some method
I
for,
agree, but it doesn't work, right? So we've got, right now, saying lot 15 needs to be a community space, and there's flexibility, and the response back from the DRB has been, you're not specific enough. So now we're talking about getting specific enough, and now we're saying we need more flexibility,
The
so
real
which is
response
it?
was that, plus, one of the options you indicated in your flexible approach is the one the applicant chose, and they nailed it. So if you,
I think,
Right, so then,
So-
now you're talking about we have to put design standards around what a farmer market is, right? And you've just been talking about you don't want to get
I
that crazy,
think
so.
we have to be fairly specific
You know?
about the type of use we want to see in a certain area, right, on the official map. I think that Alex's, note that, the way to handle this with a master plan is that if the developer comes in beforehand, before submitting the application and talks to us and we can come to some agreement, then we can change the master plan.
Can we say that? Can we say that very thing? You,
Well, I think we can say
developer
that.
needs to come in. You know, if you have a plan that's different than our official map, you need to meet with us before you
I
submit
suppose,
your
I
proposal.
suppose we could put that as part
Can
of
we
our-
actually say, do that?
Right, with that, it's 9 o'clock and I'm
Right, you're gonna check
I'm
out.
checking
Thank
out.
you.
Sorry-
Thank
sorry
you for
about that.
joining us tonight. Good to
but-
see you.
Nice to see you back.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you.
Take care of
Appreciate it.
yourself. Continue to take care of
When
yourself.
it comes up, I'm fine with moving things to 7.
Okay.
Kind of makes sense. All right, thank you all.
Good night, Joe.
All right.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
So speaking to John's question, the answer to that is yes. I've read regs in some towns where a pre-application meeting is a requirement.
Yes.
Usually it's with staff as opposed to with a board, but, so that is something that could happen. I also have a question for you, and that is, I think that this public green space design standards section is, as Jeff and Dennis are keep coming back to, very tied to the official map in ways. Rather than having me start drafting architectural design standard, which is what I was going to do next, is, you know, have some streetscape and architectural design standards. We had a couple other issue areas that we wanted design standards for. Do you want me to just update, you know, give you an updated official map so you can talk about that at your next meeting, and we can have a knockdown drag out about which
Yeah.
blob is supposed to be what?
If I can interject, we had talked about several meetings ago, about a map that was going to show the open space that was existing, including trails, sidewalks, the connections of the open space.
Yes.
And we did a hand version of it and looked at that a little bit, but we never really went through and finished
We did,
that.
at the last meeting, we looked at the finished version,
Oh,
which is,
okay.
I didn't bring.
And I wasn't here.
You weren't here. I
Right.
didn't bring it down tonight, but it does exist, and I have it upstairs. And so at the next meeting, I can put
Maybe
that
that
up
comes
along with,
too.
you know, official map draft 2, and if you want. Otherwise, we can also put that off and do architectural design standards and streetscape, and then do the official map at the end.
No, I think that's a good segue from this section to.
Okay. It does seem like it's really connected, and
Yeah.
you guys want to talk about
Yeah.
And I
what those
think
spaces
it will
are.
also influence what the architectural standards, what the build standards would be, depending on how we define all these spaces on our official map. So I think reversing the order is not
Okay.
inappropriate, from my point of view.
But, and I agree. But my concern is the one that Joe raised, that, okay, we'll do all this great work and we'll flush out the official map, we'll say, this is what we want, and we'll have a project, it'll end up going back to the Act 250 court and say, you have no funding mechanism, it doesn't matter, bye. So, do we need to
That's why I
think?
think you need to pick out a spot where you want
Yeah,
and go talk to the landowner and see what you can do to get it.
Right,
should-
have
you
it
should
barter
it.
appraised, yeah.
You might barter with
Yeah,
them, whatever you gotta do,
I
and get
personally
it.
don't believe that would hold up in court, because
No, you're just
we
asking,
we
I'm
are
not saying you're gonna
required
get it,
to,
but.
we are required to have the
That's what
town
we're trying
maps,
to
the
do,
official
get
maps,
control of
right?
that piece.
Well, so we're not required to have an official map, that's an optional regulatory tool, but we do have one.
We have one, and there are guidelines for official maps.
And remember,
And it's a planning tool.
Right, but do you want the park now, or do you want it 20 years from now?
Well, exactly, and if it's something
I'm
for
guessing
20 or
everybody wants
30
it
years
now.
from now, how could we possibly start putting away money in a capital budget for something 20 to 30 years from now? I mean, I like your idea of putting down maybe 25 cents in a capital budget for, if that's what we have to do in order to hold it up.
because isn't the reason the Act 250 says that is because if push comes to shove, the town has to put up or,
Right.
you know, and
But
buy the
I- I
property or something?
I think it's important to understand that the official map as a regulatory tool is not designed to interface with the Act 250 process. It's designed to be part of the municipal development review process, and all the provisions about if you deny a project based on it, a clock starts and the town has to
Yep,
implement
exactly.
proceedings to acquire the property. That's all in the context of the municipal review.
Of course it is.
Act 250 is a state level review. It's just that Act 250 has a criteria that asks whether a project is consistent with the municipal plan. And in Hannaford's case, Joe was the planning commission's representative who went to the Act 250 hearings and said, our town plan includes this official map and the project is not consistent with that. And so that's how it got wrapped into Act 250. The official map is not designed to be an Act 250 tool.
No, of course it's not. It's a municipal planning tool.
Yeah.
And yet, it seems like in order for it to achieve the Act 250 standard, we have to have money down. You know, we have to have it in the capital budget.
Yeah,
so they're the ones who turned it into a.
Right, and I'm not convinced that it's purely that simple that it needs to be in the capital budget, but I think that some additional planning around it probably would help better make the case, you know, with discussions and, yeah. Most of them have.
Some of them come in with their plans already prepared, and that's why I'm saying, can't we say, you gotta come in and talk to us before you submit anything? Which,
Well, that just forces the
Hasn't
conversation
happened.
that Dennis suggesting we have, right?
right, exactly, I think we should force it.
Right.
They have come in before and talked.
Most applicants do come in and talk with staff before they
staff.
submit the application. Hannaford was the exception to the rule. They
They
did
just-
lots of research but didn't actually have a sit-down
Right.
conversation about what the project was until the day they submitted the application.
Right.
Maybe we should put that in because it's caused a lot of strife. in the
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Those are the kind of,
But it just would have early on had the more informal, casual conversation I think that Dennis is alluding to, where it's, you know, we would have looked at that and said, well, where's the, you know, the official map community thing? And they would have said, oh, okay, well, and we might have been able to flush that out,
maybe.
you know, before it came to a head kind of
It's
thing,
hard
that's
to
all.
say. There were two issues that came up in that first meeting in November of 2010 when they came to drop off the application. And the first one was the official map. Said, it seems like you've ignored or didn't realize that we had this regulatory provision. So even though they were dropping off the application, we did have an extensive meeting and that was made known to them and then they chose to proceed the way they did. So I'm not sure that forcing them to have had that meeting a week prior to them submitting the application would have mattered.
So it all depends on who happens to be submitting the.
I think so, yeah.
yeah, we can't.
So just
think we can control
bringing it back to the green space standards, where are we, where do we stand with these? Are we all happy and
No, I got a bunch
and
of small
fluffy?
questions. Want to talk about those?
Well- yeah,
On page 2, in the middle, in bold, not something that was added from the earlier meetings, they shall include at least 50 feet of road frontage along these public open spaces. Why,
So
Do we need
they're
to
accessible to the public.
well, why not say that there needs to be a connection, like vehicle access, a certain minimum width, but 50 feet seemed arbitrary to me when I read it.
So it's 60 feet, John.
Or 60 feet,
And
excuse me.
it mirrors the required road frontage for a lot in most of these districts. So if
Right.
you're gonna create a new development lot, it has to have 60 feet of road frontage. So I
Right,
thought it was a logical tie-in to say, well, if you're gonna have an undeveloped lot for open space, it ought to have at least the same amount of road frontage so that it's not only connected but visible from the public
Right.
way.
well, my
I
thought
mean-
was access was what was important to that public space, and you don't need 60 feet of width to get access. You can have something smaller, narrower, so that it
I made that the same point because I was thinking of that in Montpelier, that little park above the State House
Above
where
the
it's
State House, right.
above that where it's just a path into a fountain area, but it's with unless the DRB approves a lesser amount, so you could have a little hidden
You could-
garden
you
that's
could say-
accessible
Yeah, you
from a
could say,
path.
we wanna do
Yeah.
it smaller, and the DRB could
Yeah.
approve it. Okay.
Yeah, I think the goal was just, it was visible to the public, you know, so like while the park you're talking about in Montpelier is nice, how many people actually know and use it?
Residents probably who walk,
Right.
who
I
walk
think
by there,
Quite
yeah.
a few, at least,
Okay.
Yeah.
when I've been
The
there,
other
it's
side of
been,
that is the little pocket park that's over by Kinney.
Mhm.
I never see anybody in it. And it's
Right.
got at least 60
In the
feet of
middle.
road frontage.
I've sat there
and
with
all
my
you see
dog
is
waiting to get food from
cars.
Bristol Acre.
Right.
And that's very attractive.
It doesn't have 60 feet of road frontage,
No,
Barbara, that's the
it's-
point, it's behind
it's
the
in a
building
parking
and
lot.
next to the parking lot, it
Right,
has
it's
zero
in a
road
parking
frontage.
lot.
I brought
Oh,
that
I
up.
would consider
Yeah.
parking
and
lot
it's
road frontage,
not.
so.
No, it's
landscaped.
not.
It's not landscaped, so it's not shady.
It's true, John, that's a good
Kinda
point.
useless.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
just-
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
not
Without
homey
shade.
at all.
Nasty
It's a
space, nobody
definite
wants to go there.
What else have you got, John?
Even the people
Okay,
that
what
live
else I
there.
have on page 3 at the very top, just vague words. Concentrated storm water infrastructure, parens, e.g. detention ponds, retention ponds, large rain gardens. What's large? It's one of those undefined terms that, you know, somebody could say, oh, this is large.
All right, so,
Also, so that's one thing. The next paragraph where you keep referring to things being on-site, can't we just say within the project area? I mean, that's what we're talking about, and you even use that phrase at one point. So there's a couple of references to on-site there that could say on-site, within the project area, off-site, outside the project area. And then at the very bottom, on the amount of contribution, the very last sentence, but realistic enough so that it makes sense. It's another one of those value terms, makes sense, what
Oh,
makes
John,
sense.
sorry, that last part's in italics because it's my way of
Still being
saying,
worked on.
this is not regulatory language, this is Alex saying, this needs to be fleshed out, and this is
Okay.
how it needs to be fleshed
Okay,
out.
okay,
But I take your,
Yeah, I
language
mean, it's
change
hard.
suggestion with regard to on-site and off-site, changing that to within and outside of the
it's
project.
hard to avoid value words, but it's good if you can, I think. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Nitpicking.
Does anyone else have additional comments to what we're, to the standards? Any, So what's our next step with this? Alex, you wanted to,
Well, so I think I'm gonna
flesh out that-
set this down and develop a official map version 2 and have that with the map that John was talking about, showing existing open spaces at your next meeting so that you can talk about, you know, where you want certain types of open space and, yeah. Is that, and you, sounds like you were up for that conversation. Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
all right. So, yeah, actually, that might, our discussion on the official map might inform what we decide to do with the green space.
With the design
plan.
standards,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so let's close that part of this discussion and move on to minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes to look through. Let me go back here. So first minutes of May 9th. Any comments? Any changes, additions? Anyone want to rewrite history? Make yourselves sound better? We could all make ourselves sound more intelligent.
Did I say that?
I didn't say that. Wait, what? Motion to approve?
Motion to approve the minutes of May 9th.
All in, or, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and then minutes of the 23rd. Additions, deletions, changes,
Extension.
rewriting
I
history.
wasn't there.
Motion to approve the minutes? Second?
Aye.
Everyone in favor?
Abstain.
Abstain.
All right. Barb and John.
You abstain?
No, I didn't
No.
abstain.
You did
I didn't, no.
for the second.
Sorry, that was quick.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I just heard a voice now.
You're okay, so, moving on to other business and correspondence. So, changing the start time to 7 PM, which would have us go 7 to 9 PM.
Good with me.
Thoughts?
Good idea.
Does this not work for anyone?
Oh, it's too early and too late, no.
Which end doesn't work for us?
Can you make it work?
James will be here from 8 to 9.
He'll come
Right.
late and leave early.
Right. Kate, does that work for you?
Yeah.
And for Joe and Alex?
Joe said yes.
Joe said
but-
yes.
Joe
said
said
yes.
yes when he was leaving.
Yeah, sure, works for me.
Works for you?
5
And
o'clock
we
would
don't
work even
know
better,
about,
but, you know, you people have
Mr.
working lives, so.
How
We
about,
don't-
how about for the VCAM folks?
It's not, it's completely does not matter.
Okay.
Good.
I think Ken, the last time this came up at a DARE meeting, said every other board that they cover starts at 7, so.
It's non-consequential.
All right.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'll, so
So
next
Rolf
meeting will
is the
start at
only
7.
one we don't know about.
I think Ralph
He'll
is,
probably.
it's too
Ralph
late.
can- Right.
Well,
Was in favor of when we discussed
I
it
wish I
before.
remember, yeah, I
I think.
don't remember.
I don't, nobody seemed to raise any big opposition the last time we talked. That's my recollection.
Um,
Do we have to vote on
no, we don't have to,
No,
Just
it's fine, I'll just
adjourn.
change it to 7 going forward.
okay? And, so the last, and thank you everybody for that, the last item is the memo to the select board.
So I explained this ahead of the last meeting in an email that I sent the day of the meeting, May 23rd. And then I forgot to have you talk about it on May 23rd. So it's on the agenda this time so as not to forget talking about it. So if you don't remember, well, hopefully you saw the draft in your packet, which basically explains it. Statute requires you to submit a report when the select board monkeys with what you proposed, essentially.
Yeah.
And the select board basically rubber stamped and is having a hearing on everything you proposed except for expanding the drive-through prohibition. So, so that's what you need to comment on, and this is a draft memo saying that it's not gonna break the town plan if they don't go with your suggestion, and although you don't agree with that, you know, you would like to expand it, it's a policy difference, and you appreciate the select board acting on all the other stuff, so.
And you left out the snarkiness, I noticed,
I tried to leave out the snarkiness, yeah. So
which is probably a good thing.
but this memo is coming from me, but based on your comments tonight, so if you want me to change it, I'm happy to. Just, that's why it's on the agenda.
What were some of the select board's concerns, or what drove them to say?
They were split, just so you know, and I think that they were concerned about access for folks who have disabilities. I think they were, I I think they felt like we've had these regulations in place for a very long time, and we haven't seen, deleterious results. For example, the National Bank of Middlebury was a newly constructed facility with a drive-through. Kinney's was a newly constructed facility with a drive-through, and I don't think they felt that either of those facilities were breaking the village sort of land use pattern. And so why couldn't the DRB deal with this on a case-by-case basis, and making sure the project was properly designed? But with that said, Jeff, they were split. I think there were a couple board members that were agreed with this board's thought that expanding the prohibition would be fine, and a few others just thought it wasn't.
Could there
necessary.
possibly be, move the drive-throughs to the back of the building type of, like Kenny's Drugs? You know what I mean? You don't have a line of cars, and I don't know. It's just a thought. I personally, I'm not gonna raise a bunch of ire about it. I just, was thinking, is there something that kind of comes in the middle,
So at this point, and this happens every time we do these big batches of changes, if this were the only change they were looking at, then I think your suggestion would be a good one to say, well, wait, let's take a step back, spend another month or so figuring this out. Maybe there's an alternative solution here that achieves the aims without a full-on prohibition.
Yeah.
But the process doesn't work that way. So if you want the select board to, or you as a planning commission to rework this, you're either holding up the entire package of changes, or you're gonna let it go and maybe put it on the list for future consideration.
So I'm the person that makes everything take 10 years, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Jeff. That's
Pretty
what I'm
much.
saying, exactly.
So
Yeah.
the prohibition for no windows at food
Restaurants.
restaurants, that stands.
Correct. Yep, they felt that was fine, and that's
Okay.
what the zoning has been for a couple
Right.
decades, and that ought to
Right.
stay.
Right, okay.
They just didn't want to expand it to everything else.
Do we vote on it, or how does this work?
Just tell you, go ahead.
I think either a motion to submit to authorize me to submit this memo as drafted would be great, or just concurrence that this reflects your feelings on the matter.
Oh, what the heck, let's have a motion. Somebody?
Motion for Alex to submit the memorandum as drafted to the select board.
Nicely done. Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Alrighty.
I should have opposed, so there's just one in there.
Just
You
a
know?
token bit of
There would've been the
snarkiness,
one guy.
just so we have our say.
On the correspondence front, John put this in my lap when he walked in.
Yeah.
And why don't I email this out to everybody? I'll scan it and email it out. But it's an interesting sounding conference in White River Junction in September, sort of the third week of September on, it's called Leading Locally, Design Review for Preservation Planning. So it's the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation, so a state agency along with a group called Historic New England putting this on. I'll email it to you. It's relatively inexpensive,
Yeah.
Where is it?
several days.
White
It's
River
in White River Junction. The other correspondence or just announcement or whatever is maybe when we're off camera so that you don't have to divulge when you're not going to be home. I'd sent you all an email saying, could you let me know your summer vacation plans so we can know which meetings we might not have a quorum for and we might want to move or cancel.
Did you send out the meeting dates?
I did not send out the meeting dates. I just said, let me know what your vacation plans are, because the meeting dates are second and fourth Wednesdays. So maybe we don't need to talk about that
We don't need to
on the
talk about
record,
that.
but
Yeah,
we could have a procedural chat afterwards.
okay. Anything else?
That's all I got.
I think you've mentioned that we do not need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
The chair, I believe, has that power.
Huh.
Come on, throw me this over phone.
No, we've had enough of that. Unless anyone objects, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job.